So my project question was how to read an ancient Greek text in its originality. And it consisted of a process where I first studied ancient Greek, then I briefly researched translation studies, and lastly, I translated Sophocles' Antigone from its originality. That was the text I chose for this project. A little bit of context to start. Why study a dead language? Mary Beard is a renowned classicist who provides an excellent argument for the relevance and importance of studying dead languages. She believes, as I do, that these languages give modern day scholars glimpses into the past, into ancient societies that allow, um, that give crucial information about government and politics that can help modern society. And ancient Greek was spoken throughout 1500 to 300 BC, in which the language evolved greatly. Well known philosophers, politicians, dictators, and civilians spoke the language. However, only the wealthy and the nobility could read and write in ancient Greek. So, the syllabus for my independent study covered all materials and information learned, that is the equivalent of 2 years of ancient Greek courses at Harvard University. The independent study I completed took a total of 6 months, but it was very adjustable because it's an independent study. Here I've included a brief overview of my syllabus, and as you can see, certain materials were um, I needed to complete in between each session. And during my sessions, my mentor gave me a lecture on the materials I was learning and going to learn. And something interesting I found in my study was that I was able to start translating Antigone before my independent study had finished. So I thought that was very surprising. The materials that I needed for my independent study um, were accessible through websites like Amazon. The three books that I used were the Joint Association of Classical Teachers Reading Greek and Grammar and Exercises, Text of Vocabulary, and Independent Study Guide. These three books provided the necessary information, exercises, translation, vocabulary, and grammar for me to successfully complete this introductory course to ancient Greek. For the independent study, my mentor also provided extra materials he utilized to teach ancient Greek courses at Harvard University. Um, in addition to these, I also used YouTube videos to help me understand more difficult concepts to grasp. So here I've included just the three books that I used for my study, which were just pretty much gave me the foundations of my project. On the very left-hand side, the grammar and exercises included the majority of information I learned in my independent study. And on the very right-hand side, the text and vocabulary included practice translations for me to start practicing and vocabulary lists for me to memorize. In the middle, the independent study included the answers to both books and just a thorough guide to how to finish these books. After my independent study was completed, I continued to work on other um, reading courses. So my mentor recommended this course, which is a Greek prose reading course for post beginners. There's 4 books in the series. They cover forensic oratory, history, tragedy, and drama. So when I was getting closer to finishing my independent study, I went on and briefly researched and learned about translation methods and theories. So to begin, translation in literary terms is rendering the literature from the source language to the target language. There are many purposes of translating, including cultural exchange, conveying meaning, and communication. Translation methods. I'm not going to go deeply into translation methods because it's not the focus of my project, but I want to mention that the 2 authors that I read that probably gave me the most information on it were Geraldo da Campo and Lawrence Venuti. They gave me a lot of information regarding the relevance of translation methods in today's society, as well as how it's evolved over the past few years, past few decades. So a few different translation methods include word-for-word translation, literal translation, adaptation, idiomatic translation, and metaphorical translation. For my project, I focused a little bit more on prismatic theory. It caught my attention because it's very innovative and unique. The prismatic theory is a unique translation theory that depends on multiple translations of one text to flesh out certain components of the original text. It challenges existing translation theories because it's based on creativity, language variation, and integration with other modes like poetry, nonfiction, and fiction. So for Sophocles' Antigone, it's a very popular and well-known, well-read work. And so there's many, many translations of it. And I want to address like, what is the significance of having so many translations? Um, The new translations challenge existing interpretations, which further improve scholarly work, and translators can only express certain aspects of one text. With the help of multiple translations, one can gain a better picture of the original text. And again, that goes back to prismatic theory. Prismatic theory reminds me of when you're washing clothes and you're trying to rinse out dirt from a shirt, and you rinse it again, and you rinse it again until it's clean. That's how I think of prismatic theory. So then I'm going to move on to my translation of Antigone. First, the tragedy was written by Sophocles in 441 BC. It has been performed numerous times throughout ancient Greece, but the characters were all played by male actors. In summary, in a brief overview, Antigone depicts the sequel from Oedipus Rex. The play depicts themes of feminism, person versus society, and more. When I started translating Antigone, I kept my vocabulary and grammar on hand, and I used an English translation and a commentary. The English translation I used to compare my work, to compare my perspective versus another perspective on the text, but the commentary was very, very useful for me because it allowed me to see the inconsistencies in the original Greek text versus the Koine dialect and the Attic dialect of Greek. And it also gave me line by line annotations. So the differences in my translation versus the English translation, but here I'm going to talk about some common problems that I faced when I finished my translation. So my mentor pointed out that I had errors in fluidity, which can be called translationese, where the translation sounds stiff and the translated language does not sound natural. These difficulties were easily remedied by reading the translation out loud and making slight corrections. So here I've included a passage from my translation. I'll briefly go over this. So this passage is from the second Stasimon, which represents the divine forces that haunt the last descendants of the House of Labdacids, which is the family of Antigone and Oedipus. The opening phrase is deceptive because it suggests a positive song, but the rest of the chorus packs in bold imagery as it dwells on the destructive power of the gods. My translation focuses on creatively interpreting the imagery that acts as a foreboding speech in which the chorus expresses. For Sophocles' tragedy, I've focused on being as dramatic as possible while also being direct with my translation, because I felt like that was the true purpose of Sophocles' drama. So here, blessed are they who live a full life without evil, for those whose house has been shaken by a thunderbolt thrown by the gods. No element of ruin is lacking as it advances over the multitude of the family. In these lines, I place emphasis on bold imagery by complying with the underlying and cultural meaning of seiste, which means to be shaken by a thunderbolt, earthquake, or maritime storm. The last line above is also innovative, as I have utilized wording that encompasses the definitions of future generations of the family lineage and the lateral family as well. That goes back to the other play, Oedipus Rex, and how the misfortune falls on Oedipus as well as his descendants. So to conclude here, I've included my favorite line out of my whole translation, which includes, which I felt was represents the strong and overarching message of the play. So the chief part of true success is wisdom. Do not act impiously towards the gods, for boasts of arrogant men bring great blows of punishment, but so in old age men can discover wisdom. Well, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for watching.
Thank you so much. And just as a reminder, you can put questions into the chat for Emma. Um, One question for you though. So you mentioned there are a lot of different translation techniques, but you ultimately decided to use prismatic. Do you think your project would have been different had you decided on a different approach or different translation method?
I think it could have been different using a different technique had I researched a little bit more on translation theory. I went over translation theory very briefly because it was something that I just was interested in, so kind of threw it in the project last minute. But I do think it would have had an impact on the result.
Wonderful. And then I see we have another question in the chat, and I will leave that for you, Emma, to answer via text. But please continue to feel free to throw in questions in if you have more questions for Emma.